Bienvenue à tous. Welcome to Reporters here on France 24. I'm Comin. For years, Mexico has been at the top of the list of the most dangerous countries for journalists. According to Reporters Without Borders, more than 150 have been killed in Mexico since the year 2000 for reasons directly related to their profession. 17 of them in 2022 alone, of which 11 were all about what they do for a living. The deadliest year for the press in Mexico on record. This week we go to Tijuana, on the border with the United States, a city that had a violent start to 2022. In less than a week, two journalists, Margarito Martínez and Lourdes Maldonado, were murdered, two cases that represent the multiple dangers faced by Mexican journalists, caught between the political world and organised crime, which sometimes work hand in hand. Calls for help from journalists, sadly, do not seem to be heard. The Mexican government continues to vilify them. Our reporter, Laurence Cuvillier, joins us now from Mexico City. Laurence, why then head to Tijuana?
Well, because the city has become, at the beginning of 2022, symbolic of the dramatic situation experienced by the Mexican press in recent years. Two journalists were murdered in less than a week. A press photographer, Margarito Martínez, and a columnist, Lourdes Maldonado. And they are revealing of the evils that journalists face in Mexico. On the one hand, the insecurity caused by organized crime, and on the other hand, the corruption of the political world fueled by impunity. And then there's a more personal reason. It's in Tijuana that we had for the first time followed journalists on the ground when we arrived in Mexico in 2009. So we could realize this time to what extent being a journalist there is even more dangerous than it used to be.
Laurence, thank you very much indeed. Let's now take a look at the report by Laurence Cuvillier and Matthieu Comin.
10 p.m. on the streets of Tijuana.
The police have just made a macabre discovery on the pedestrian bridge of Sanchez Taboada Avenue.
It's just a night like any other for Arturo, covering crime scenes. There were almost 2,000 in Tijuana in 2022. Crimes designed to spread terror in the city.
It's an arm and a leg, accompanied by a message from the criminal group, all hanging from the pedestrian bridge. As you can see, the avenue has been blocked, so watch out for changes in traffic routes. Have a good night to all followers of Blanco y Negro Noticias. The news was brought to you by Arturo Rosales.
Arturo sells his photos as a freelancer and takes live videos for social media. He got along well with Margarito Martínez. Margarito was a photographer like him and was murdered on January the 17th, 2022.
We used to run into each other all the time at crime scenes. If he was still alive, he'd be here right now.
Margarito was the first victim of the deadliest year for the Mexican press. Less than a week after him, in the same city, Lourdes Maldonado, another journalist, was shot by hired killers. Two very different stories, the same tragic ending. Lourdes had made herself known in 2019 during a press conference by the Mexican president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador.
I am here to ask for your help and to ask for justice. I fear for my life. He is a powerful politician who refuses to pay the wages he owes me. He's a senator from your party and your next candidate for governor in the Baja California elections, Jaime Bonilla.
I am going to ask our communications coordinator to take care of your case so that you get justice and there is no influence peddling.
For 6 years, Lourdes had denounced in court and in the media the former governor of Baja California and media owner Jaime Bonilla. She accused him of tax evasion and multiple violations of labor laws. Sonia de Anda, coordinator of a collective of journalists from Tijuana, followed this case closely.
Lourdes called me in March 2021 to tell me that someone had shot at her car. And immediately she mentioned Jaime Bonilla. She told me, I know it's him, because I criticize him every day in my program. A program that she broadcasts on social media from the kitchen of her home.
And so right now, as governor, he's just put together a whole series of arrangements with the news media to silence all the journalists.
The Wednesday before she died, she stood in front of the offices of PSN, Jaime Bonilla's media group, and shouted that she was going to seize the company's assets, and that she was going to prove that the company didn't pay taxes, paid its employees under the table, etc.
The law demands they give me access to all these documents. We're going to go through them and file a complaint for all the violations of the law that are taking place in this company.
4 days later, Lourdes Maldonado was shot and killed in front of her home. We went to the PSN headquarters. 3 people have been charged for their alleged participation in the murder, but Jaime Bonilla has so far not been investigated by the authorities.
There is not much to say about the case of Lourdes Maldonado. She worked for my company. I hardly knew her. I was an MP at the time she was hired. I only knew she had a dispute with the management, so she filed a complaint, and that's it. What happened to her causes a lot of pain, but the legal system has all the necessary information. The president said that he was going to study this case closely. He must have done so for his own sake. But in any case, he never asked us any questions.
When asked about the progress of the investigation, the state prosecutor said he is biding his time.
We are blocked by the parliamentary immunity that he has at the moment. But that doesn't mean the investigation is not moving forward in the meantime. I want to be clear. It is a lead that we are following very closely.
Margarito knew he was under threat too, but from organised crime and from the information war waged against the drug cartels. For several years in Tijuana, dozens of so-called news profiles have appeared on social media. Some of them carry questionable information. Simple rumours, accusations without proof, unsigned documents. It's impossible to know who's behind it. Arturo has noticed them increasing with concern. The limits between journalism and propaganda have become dangerously blurred.
If the media does not have basic transparency, I refuse to work for them, because these sites that pretend to be news sites in general don't have a website, only a Facebook page with badly written text. It's the law enforcement that takes these pictures and lets them leak. For example, this so-called news source published very close-up photos. No journalist could get that close to a crime scene. There are at least 20 pages like that in Tijuana, spreading fake news, publishing uncensored photos.
Some accounts seem to be on a crusade against one cartel, like Tijuana at War, which for months talked only about the wrongdoings of the Cabo 20 gang. By broadcasting extremely violent photos of the crime scenes, it gained more audience than some traditional news outlets, more than 150,000 subscribers. Margarito signed his photos and worked only for reputable outlets. But one day, an altercation broke out between Margarito and a young man who filmed him and made accusations against him.
Yo no tengo medios escondidos que es Tijuana en guerra y quemando malandros como los que traes tú, güey. Yo lo único que te pido, conmigo no te metas. Ahí está, para que vean. Este señor es el que maneja Tijuana en guerra, quemando malandros. Trae muchos medios de comunicación falsos que se la lleva subiendo notas falsas también.
The video has been seen thousands of times. The man who attacked Margarito is Ángel Peña, author of Facebook page Ángel Informs You. He was raising the suspicions of Tijuana journalists for months for his unethical practices.
The way Ángel Peña behaved at the time was not at all journalistic. And Margarito began to alert our colleagues about it. he was convinced that Ángel Peña was a hawk. That's what we call those people who, under the guise of journalism, pass information to criminal groups about where the police are, or have blocked avenues, etc. Ángel Peña would go to the scene, start transmitting live. He would do close-ups on the faces of the police officers, the license plates of the police vehicles, the unit numbers. No journalist would do that.
Less than a month after his violent exchange, Margarito is killed. A few moments after the tragedy, his friends gather at the crime scene.
And some people start to warn us. Ángel Peña is here. He's filming live. And that's when I ran up to him.
Okay.
Deberían hasta vergüenza de estar aquí.
¿Por qué?
Maldito perro.
Vergüenza robada.
Eres un perro. Eres un falso. Lárgate de aquí.
¿Yo por qué?
Lárgate.
Somos libertarios.
Sí, soy periodista. A diferencia de ustedes, que se dedican a promover las páginas de narcos. Tú acusaste a Margarito de falsamente. Cállate, cállate.
Margarito Martínez.
In the following months, the arrest and indictment of several alleged perpetrators of the murder seemed to confer that the mastermind was indeed Cabo 20, the criminal leader constantly attacked in the Tijuana at War articles. We contacted the administrators of the page, but they did not respond to our requests for interviews. One more night, with an average of more than 5 murders per day, the streets of Tijuana are busy. Between two crime scenes, Arturo works as a cab driver to fill the downtime.
I'm now in the place where human remains have just been discovered, on 8th Street.
This time, some arrived before him. It's impossible to distinguish the journalists from the simple onlookers, influencers, or cartel informants.
A severed head was just found on the public road, just in front of an elementary school. Good evening to all those who are following this live transmission. Ángel Ibarra, hi Maribel Alvarado. There have been 70 murders in the city in the first 10 days of this month. What? 78. We're approaching 80. Unbelievable, right?
We encounter someone unexpectedly. Ángel Peña, the one who had accused Margarito Martínez of being behind the Facebook pages with suspicious content. He hadn't responded to our initial interview requests.
If you have problems, it's none of my business. If he has problems, I don't interfere. You know what? Actually, I don't talk to anyone. I've been threatened by a cartel, and then by the other cartel. My back is against the wall. I want to stay out of trouble at all costs.
On Tijuana streets, everything is shady. It's impossible to know who you're talking to. The only option is to keep a distance and be discreet.
Of course I'm afraid. I'm a human being, but we have to do the job. Someone has to report on what's going on in Tijuana.
In a country where impunity for the murder of journalists is almost 100%, the arrest of a perpetrator would be a sign of hope. For now, the protection measures that Sonia de Anda also benefits from have not been tried and tested.
Crimes against journalists must be punished in an exemplary way to discourage the perpetrators. It's useless to assign bodyguards because the day they want to kill you, and it has already happened, they will first kill the bodyguard and then they kill you. We have to be very clear about our message. If you touch one of us, you touch us all. This is our only defense. And if we have to spill our blood again for it, here's mine, and the next guy's.
The borders of the news business are nowhere near as distinct as the wall that separates Tijuana from the United States. As well as the threats of organized crime and corruption, Mexican journalists must now face another enemy. One that is even more difficult to fight against: disinformation. A battle in which 17 journalists lost their lives in 2022.
A report by Laurence Cuvillier, who is still with us. Laurence, thank you so much for that insight into what journalists are facing on a daily basis in Mexico. In your report, you say that the murders of journalists are met with almost impunity. Is the justice system in Mexico then really this powerless?
Well, we have to keep in mind that in Mexico in 2021, 95% of crimes went unpunished. It's a judicial system with obsolete mechanisms where the families of the victims themselves are often the only ones who carry out real field investigations. And as you have seen in the cases of Margarito and Lourdes, there has been progress indeed, but very often the investigations remain blocked halfway. The hitmen can be captured, but the evidence to go all the way back to the people who ordered the killings are difficult to gather.
What about Mexicans, Laurence? How do they look at journalists? What do they think of them? Is journalism investigation, is it something that is seen as being important in Mexico?
Well, we feel that as journalists, when we take part in demonstrations against impunity in the case of murdered colleagues, we feel quite lonely. There are not many people outside journalists and a couple of associations and NGOs. So we cannot speak of a real support from civil society. But we must remember, as you said, that it's a country that has between 30 and 35,000 homicides per year. So the murders of journalists are drowned in a flood of crime. And another important fact is that the Mexican president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, constantly stigmatizes the press, which considerably deteriorates the support enjoyed by journalists in public opinion.
And Laurence, fake news, I suppose, is another way that the credibility of journalists is undermined.
Well, in Mexico, I would speak of a slightly different phenomenon. These are parallel information channels, as you saw in the report. Citizen informants, as they call themselves, relay unverified information, particularly on murder cases, information accompanied by shocking images, of which Mexico is unfortunately full, with more than 80 murders a day. And the boundary is being totally blurred between the practice of journalism based on verified information and this type of citizen information that has monopolized social networks in cities like Tijuana.
Laurence Cuvillier, thank you very much indeed for that insight and for your report, of course, which, of course, you can see again on our website, France24.com. The report by Laurence Cuvillier and Matthieu out there in Mexico. This is Reporters on France 24. Stay with us. Most of all, stay safe.